In today's story, we dive deep into the emotional turmoil of a woman trapped in a loveless marriage. Rose seemed to have the perfect life with her husband Aiden, but behind closed doors, their passion faded, and her loneliness grew. When Aiden's best friend Hunter entered the picture, Rose found herself drawn into a forbidden romance. What happens when the lines between loyalty and desire blur? Join us as we unravel this tale of love, betrayal, and heartache. Aiden was a loving husband, and I never had to worry about money. But as they say, you never truly know a marriage until you're in it. Our marriage wasn't the picture of happiness that everyone believed it to be. It wasn't that Aiden had changed, become abusive, or unfaithful. It was more like a slow burn, our feelings for each other fading, along with our intimacy. I was only in my early 30s, young and with a husband by my side, yet I felt like a widow trapped in a loveless marriage. Our physical intimacy had become routine, not exactly cold and distant, but lacking the passion we once had. It was like fulfilling an obligation, a chore on a to-do list. This shift started a few years back. Aiden became increasingly distant, barely touching me anymore. I slowly began to realize he had lost all interest in our physical relationship. To put it bluntly, he no longer could perform. At first, the realization was utterly devastating. I contemplated leaving him, but the thought of all those years together, the love we once shared, held me back. Besides, the stigma attached to being a divorced woman was something I never wanted to bear. But the loneliness was suffocating, eating away at me. Every night, I craved the touch of a man, the intimacy that my husband could no longer offer. There were nights I sought solace in my own touch, but it was never enough, a poor substitute for the real thing. I was drowning in despair, all joy extinguished from my life. Everything felt meaningless, and I feared this would be my reality forever, until I met Hunter. Hunter, Aiden's best friend, was the complete opposite of my husband. While Aiden was reserved and mild-mannered, Hunter was outgoing, charming, and knew exactly how to talk to women. He had just returned from living abroad for over a decade, his personality is open and carefree. From the moment I met him, I was captivated by his boldness and cheerful demeanor. Aiden often invited Hunter over, sometimes even asking him to stay the night. With each visit, my fascination with Hunter grew. I knew it was wrong, but his constant presence was intoxicating, impossible to resist. He was about Aiden's age, but Hunter possessed a certain charisma that my husband lacked. He had the height and physique of a model, tall, muscular, with a surprisingly boyish charm. I had to admit, Hunter was undeniably handsome, far more attractive than Aiden ever was. And with each passing day, my infatuation with him intensified. One day, Aiden turned to me and said, "Hey honey, Hunter's coming over tonight. How about making something delicious? It's been a while since we last hung out." "Sure," I replied, my cheeks flushing like a love-struck teenager, though I tried to play it cool. "What does he like? I need to get some groceries." "Don't worry too much about it. Just do whatever you usually do when we have friends over. We'll probably be drinking late into the night anyway." Knowing Hunter would be coming, I went grocery shopping early that morning. I rushed home, cooked, cleaned, and changed into my most flattering outfit. I hadn't felt this excited about anything in years. That night, after hours of drinking, both Aiden and Hunter were completely wasted. Aiden, in his drunken stupor, insisted Hunter crash at our place. Hunter was so drunk he ended up throwing up all over himself, forcing me to help him change. I swear, I had no ulterior motives at first. But seeing Hunter's body, so close and unguarded, a wave of forbidden thoughts washed over me. My body responded in ways it hadn't in years. The longing, suppressed for so long, threatened to erupt. Aiden, dead to the world, was passed out in the other room. Hunter, too, was still unconscious. I figured if I was quick, no one would ever know. "Hunter?" I whispered, gently shaking him. "Hunter, are you okay? Do you need help getting to bed?" He didn't respond. Once I was sure he was fast asleep, I let my fingers brush against his arm, then leaned down and kissed him. But the moment our lips touched, Hunter's eyes flashed open. He stared at me, his hand shooting out to grip my wrist. "Rose, what are you doing?" he gasped, his voice thick with sleep and confusion. I froze, mortified, trying to pull away, but his grip was firm. I couldn't speak, my mind a jumbled mess of shame and desire. All I could do was struggle against his hold. Rose, answer me, what are you doing? He repeated, his voice sharper this time. It seemed throwing up had sobered him up considerably. I was just helping you change. I stammered, desperate to escape the awkwardness. Let go of me, and we can talk about this. But Hunter was stubborn. He refused to release me. Our struggle only brought us closer, our bodies nearly touching. He must have felt the frantic beating of my heart against his chest. I was pressed against him, my thin blouse doing little to hide the warmth radiating from his skin. He looked at me, really looked at me, his eyes tracing the curves of my body. I might have been slender, but I had curves that would rival any model's. His gaze sent a shiver down my spine, and I knew it wasn't from the alcohol. I tried to look away, but it was no use. I was trapped, both physically and emotionally. His grip tightened, and instinctively, I pushed back against him. The force of it sent me stumbling forward, my lips crashing against his once more. For a moment, we were both frozen, staring at each other in shock. He was still holding onto me, but I was no longer trying to escape. In fact, I found myself leaning into the kiss, my arms circling his neck. It had been so long. His kiss reawakened something deep inside me, fanning the dying embers of desire into a raging fire. Everything happened so fast, a whirlwind of emotions and sensations. Hunter was the first to break away, pulling back with a gasp. I, too, stumbled back, escaping his embrace and fleeing the room, leaving him standing there, dazed and confused. After that night, everything changed between us. At first, we avoided each other. Hunter didn't come over for months. But the spark had been ignited, and extinguishing it proved impossible. What was meant to be, would be. Hunter no longer saw me as just his friend's wife. I was a woman he desired, a woman he wanted to conquer. And I, consumed by thoughts of him, found myself craving his touch, his presence. My marriage, devoid of passion and intimacy, had paved the way for this dangerous attraction. That stolen kiss had unleashed a longing within me, a longing that refused to be ignored. After 3 long months, Hunter finally agreed to come over for a guy's night with Aiden. But I knew the truth. He was here for me. He arrived straight from work, his eyes meeting mine the moment he walked in. I felt a surge of guilt, seeing the conflict within him. He could barely look at Aiden, his loyalty to his friend warring with his desire for me. What you cooking? Hunter asked, his voice betraying his nervousness. Just dinner. Come on in. I mumbled, tucking a stray hair behind my ear and stepping aside to let him pass. Aiden had texted earlier, letting me know Hunter was coming over. I'd been a nervous wreck all day, a mixture of anticipation and fear. But as the evening approached, excitement took over. I dressed carefully, choosing a dress I knew would flatter my figure. I hadn't cared this much about my appearance in years. Hunter's gaze swept over me as he entered the kitchen. I could feel myself melting under his intense stare. You look beautiful, he breathed, his voice husky with desire. Before I could respond, he was in front of me, his arms wrapping around my waist, pulling me close. Then, without warning, he lifted me onto the kitchen counter, his hands lingering on my hips. His touch sent a jolt of electricity through me, and for a moment, the world faded away. Can I kiss you? He whispered, his voice raspy. I could only nod, my heart pounding against my ribs. My arms snaked around his neck, pulling him closer. His lips claimed mine in a kiss that stole my breath away. It was urgent, demanding, filled with a passion I had almost forgotten existed. I kissed him back with equal fervor, no longer holding anything back. Our bodies moved together as if choreographed, our need for each other echoing in the small space. Every touch, every stolen glance, was charged with a raw intensity that bordered on desperation. It was as if we were both drowning, clinging to each other for survival. It was a long time before we finally came up for air, our bodies slick with sweat, our breaths mingling in the warm air. We clung to each other, afraid to break the spell, to acknowledge the reckless path we were on. You have no idea how amazing you are, Hunter murmured against my lips. I never thought I'd feel this way about my best friend's wife, but that night, that kiss, it changed everything. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. He showered me with gentle touches, his fingers tracing the curve of my cheek, the line of my jaw. I know what I'm doing is wrong. I'm betraying Aiden, but I can't deny my feelings for you. Rose, do you feel it too? Hunter's words, his heartfelt confession, brought tears to my eyes. My own emotions, suppressed for so long, bubbled to the surface. I had to tell him the truth. Hunter, I began, my voice thick with unshed tears. I was drawn to you from the moment we met. But I was afraid of what you'd think, afraid of hurting Aiden. Rose. Hunter began, but I cut him off. No, let me finish. I insisted. My feelings for Aiden, they're gone. He's a good man, but he hasn't been able to be a husband to me, not in the way I need. For a long time now, I felt empty. Like a part of me was missing. I looked into his eyes, pleading for him to understand. I want to be with you, Hunter. I do, but I can't just leave Aiden. He doesn't deserve that. But please, just let me have this. Let me be with you, even if it has to be our secret. The fear that had held me captive for so long evaporated. Hunter's feelings for me were real. And mine for him? They were undeniable. The passion we'd just shared had awakened something inside me, a sense of aliveness I hadn't felt in years. It was exhilarating, terrifying, and utterly intoxicating. Rose, my love, my Rose, he whispered, a look of pure adoration on his face. He leaned down, his lips brushing against mine. You're mine now. We'll figure this out, I promise. The vows of two adulterers, spoken in hushed tones within the very walls of his best friend's home. The irony was not lost on me, and yet, we clung to those words, those promises, as if they could somehow justify our actions. We called it love, this thing between us, and perhaps it was. Or perhaps, love was just the perfect excuse for our betrayal. We were still locked in an embrace when we heard the familiar sound of Aiden's key in the door. We scrambled to get dressed, our movements a flurry of panicked energy. But it was too late. Aiden was already inside, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of his wife, half-dressed, and his best friend, struggling to button his shirt. I shoved the rest of Hunter's clothes into his hands and practically pushed him out the door. He's here. Go, go. I hissed. Hey man, sorry I'm late, Hunter said, forcing a casual tone. Got caught up at work. No worries, I just got here myself, Aiden replied, though I could detect a note of weariness in his voice. Rose, honey, is dinner ready? I'm starving. We settled down at the table, me choosing to sit next to Hunter under the pretense of serving the food. Aiden, oblivious to the tension crackling between us, dug into his dinner, recounting his day with forced cheerfulness. Under the table, Hunter's hand found mine. His touch sent a shiver down my spine, a mixture of fear and excitement. He squeezed my hand reassuringly, his fingers tracing circles on my palm. His touch was electric, sending a jolt straight to my core. Every now and then, he'd give my hand a playful squeeze, making me squirm in my seat. I tried to ignore the thrill it sent through me, the guilt gnawing at the edges of my desire. Aiden was right there, oblivious to the silent exchange taking place under his very nose. But as Hunter continued his subtle touches, I found myself leaning into them, my body betraying my better judgment. Aiden excused himself to get a drink, and I seized the opportunity to shoot Hunter a warning glare. Hunter, stop it, what if he sees? I whispered harshly. But he just grinned mischievously, his hand sliding further up my thigh. I gasped, my eyes widening in alarm. Before I could protest further, he leaned in close, his lips brushing against my ear. Don't worry, I've got something of yours. I'll give it back to you later, he murmured, his voice a low growl. I felt a blush creep up my neck, my heart racing. Before I could process his words, Aiden returned, a questioning look on his face. Everything okay over here? He asked, his brow furrowed slightly. Yeah, fine, Hunter replied smoothly, picking up his glass and taking a sip. Just catching up with your lovely wife. So, what were you saying about work? And just like that, he steered the conversation back to safe territory. Aiden, none the wiser, launched into another work-related anecdote. But I could barely focus on his words. My mind was racing, my body thrumming with a dangerous combination of guilt and desire. Their affair had begun, and only God knew when it would end. Perhaps it never would, and Aiden would just end up with an impressive set of horns. They continued their charade, carrying on their illicit affair right under Aiden's nose, while he remained none the wiser. One day, Aiden announced, "Hey, honey, I'll be going out of town for work for a few days with my boss. You'll be all right on your own, won't you?" Internally, Rose was ecstatic. Outwardly, she feigned concern. "Of course, but I'll miss you. It'll be lonely without you. Come home soon." Aiden, touched by her display of affection, hugged her and kissed her forehead. Rose just smiled to herself, her mind already scheming. That night, she texted Hunter. "Aiden will be out of town for work for a few days. Guess that means we'll have plenty of time to ourselves." Hunter replied almost instantly. "Finally. I've missed you like crazy. We haven't even been able to see each other all week. You owe me big time, you know?" "Oh, I'll make it up to you. Don't worry. Gotta go. Love you." Rose typed quickly, hoping Aiden wouldn't notice her giddy mood. Lately, Aiden had started to pick up on Rose's strange behavior. He noticed how she would get a dreamy look on her face whenever she was on her phone, a small smile playing on her lips. One evening, he entered the room just as Rose was giggling at something on her phone. "What's so funny? What are you looking at?" he asked, curious. Rose, startled, quickly hid her phone. "Oh, it's nothing. Just some silly messages from my friends. They're trying to arrange a coffee date next week." "Ah, that's nice. You should go. It'll do you good to get out and socialize a bit, especially with me being gone for work and all." "Yeah, you're right," Rose mumbled, her voice subdued. Aiden came to bed, wrapping his arms around Rose. But Rose's mind was miles away, consumed by thoughts of Hunter. Her husband, once the center of her universe, was now nothing more than a roommate, a stranger sharing her bed. Ever since Hunter had entered her life, Rose felt like a different person. She embraced a more alluring style, wearing clothes that accentuated her curves. She started wearing makeup more often, a sparkle in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She sought any excuse to distance herself from Aiden, her heart no longer invested in their marriage. The moment Aiden left for his trip, Rose messaged Hunter. "He's gone. Come over tonight? I'll make us dinner." "Baby, you know I wouldn't miss this for the world. What are you in the mood for?" Hunter replied, his words laced with desire. "Food? Who has time to think about food right now?" Rose teased. "I'm going to head to the supermarket now. See you later?" Hanging up the phone, Rose felt a surge of excitement, knowing she'd be spending the next few days wrapped in Hunter's arms, free from guilt and pretense. For now, she could simply enjoy the thrill of their secret affair, the anticipation of their reunion. For 3 glorious days, while Aiden was away, Rose and Hunter painted the town red. They were inseparable, exploring the city, discovering shared interests, their conversations flowing effortlessly. They were like a couple on a honeymoon, their laughter echoing through restaurants and parks, their hands intertwined as they strolled along the riverbank. They were lost in their own little world, a world where guilt and betrayal had no place. Those stolen nights were pure bliss. Hunter's passion was a whirlwind, sweeping Rose off her feet, making her forget everything but the feel of his touch, the taste of his kisses. They lost themselves in each other, their desire a force of nature, consuming them completely. But when the dust settled, reality came crashing down. Rose would find herself in tears, overwhelmed by guilt and shame. She tried to convince herself that it was just a fling, a temporary escape from her loveless marriage. But deep down, she knew she was in too deep. Unbeknownst to Rose, Aiden had his suspicions. Her sudden change in appearance, her distant behavior, it all added up. So, he'd installed a hidden camera in their bedroom, just to ease his mind. He never imagined what he would see. The images were seared into his brain, his wife, his best friend, their betrayal unfolding before his very eyes. Aiden, despite his quiet demeanor, was a man of strong emotions. He sent Hunter a single text message. "I can't believe after all these years, this is what you do to me. To us." The message was like a punch to the gut. Hunter was devastated. He booked a flight back to Australia, leaving a short message for Rose. I have to go back. Something came up. I don't know when I'll be back. Aiden is a good man, Rose. Don't lose him. Rose was hysterical when she received Hunter's message. Calls, texts, all went unanswered. She couldn't understand. What had she done to deserve this? Had he simply abandoned her? Then, a message from Aiden popped up on her phone. Hunter's going back to Australia tomorrow. I booked you a ticket too. Go with him, if that's what you want. The words hit Rose like a ton of bricks. Aiden knew. He knew everything. Shame, guilt, and a strange sense of panic washed over her. She'd never seen this coming. All this time, she'd been so caught up in her own desires, she'd never stopped to consider the consequences. Now, she was about to lose everything. For the first time since their affair began, Rose was terrified of losing Aiden. She rushed out, desperate to find him, to explain, to beg for his forgiveness. But it was too late. He was gone. Aiden, despite his pain, couldn't bring himself to confront Rose. He understood that his condition, his inability to be the husband she needed, had contributed to this betrayal. He chose to walk away quietly, leaving her with the consequences of her actions. He didn't yell, he didn't demand answers. He just left. Rose was left to deal with the crushing weight of her actions. Her calls went unanswered, her messages ignored. She was utterly alone. Finally, she signed the divorce papers, accepting the bitter end to a marriage that had died a slow, agonizing death. And so, Rose is left to face the devastating consequences of her choices. Aiden, broken by the betrayal, chooses to walk away quietly, leaving Rose to confront her guilt and the wreckage of their marriage. Hunter, too, is gone, leaving Rose utterly alone. What began as a search for passion led to the loss of everything she once had. In the end, the consequences of deception and betrayal cannot be undone, and Rose must now learn to live with the weight of her actions. A story of love, loss, and the painful truth that some mistakes change everything.